So I wanted to make a video on how ex-Jehovah's Witnesses view therapy. In case you missed it, Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control group. It's not just your average church. Okay, so when people do leave, over 2/3, according to the Pew Research Center, there's usually, most of the time, in most cases, really serious consequences and fallout. They lose their family, they're shunned. Friends they've known for 20, 30, 40 years or can just disappear overnight. They're left to pick up the pieces. They struggle financially, socially, they're socially awkward, emotional, psychological, you name it. So anyway, some people are like, oh my God, therapy saved me. When I left the organization, man, I found a great therapist. Others are like, didn't really do anything for me. Or they don't feel like they need it. Again, in case you missed it, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses for 30 years. I tried therapy. I've advocated for therapy for many years, will continue to do so, but I can definitely say that not all therapists are created equal. I'm sure at least a therapist somewhere out there will watch this. Maybe they agree, maybe they don't agree, that's fine. I'm not a therapist. I'm not speaking as a therapist. I am a cult survivor, and I'm just giving my boots on the ground perspective. I wanted to present both sides because I understand that there can be pros and cons or nuance to the whole thing. So anyways, after speaking to a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, this is what I've gleaned how they feel about therapy. Pro number 1, freedom of speech. All right, so a huge reason that ex-Jehovah's Witnesses appreciate therapy or have found therapy beneficial, they're able to express themselves freely. Freedom of speech. You can tell your therapist, I effing hate being a witness. I hate service. I hate the Kingdom Hall. You can say that kind of thing, and they're not going to run off to the elders and snitch on you. It's awesome. I mean, like, let's say you were a born-in. You can finally, for the first time in your life, speak freely without any consequences, which is just completely unheard of in the organization. You say that kind of stuff in the organization, there's just swift, immediate repercussions. You're punished immediately. Just the act, and I know people who have been in therapy and found it useful or helpful are going to understand this. Just being able to speak uninterrupted. Hold on now. Oh, that sounds like apostate thinking. They're not speaking over you. You can actually get your train of thought out. Whatever those thoughts are, you can express your doubts, frustration, stress. You can discuss all those things with a therapist. And it's just like, whoa, it's almost like a decompression. It's basically a judgment-free zone, and that is a completely foreign concept to Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Have to be careful what you say and who you say it to. Pro number 2, education and expertise. A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, current and former, deal specifically with fear, guilt, shame, feelings of worthlessness. I know these things can be experienced by other people in other groups or even if they're not religious, but specifically regarding Jehovah's Witnesses, they deal with this constant fear-mongering, they're never doing enough, and just guilt for everything. You do one little thing wrong and you just feel this shame. So it's insidious and it runs deep in their system. And I would say that sometimes you can be in something too deep for too long to really grasp what is happening to you. And that's where a professional steps in, right? It's like, well, I studied this for a living. Let me explain. The thing that your mom said to you, that's called gaslighting. Your elder brother or father or whatever. Oh, all those threats they're making? Yeah, that's not normal. It might be normal for you, but that's like not healthy, loving behavior. That's called emotional blackmail. And then you're like, oh, so there's I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just kind of like they've studied human behavior. So an ex-JW, they appreciate the expertise. This professional or this therapist has studied human behavior and knows all the tricks. Now, if your therapist downplays this behavior or kind of blows it off like, oh, this sounds extreme. Yeah, no shit. That's why I'm here, lady. It's why you seek therapy, right? I'm paying you money so you can help me make sense of the craziness and the dysfunction. And if they can't do that, they're probably not the most qualified. I'll get into that later. But generally speaking, an argument for therapy, why they love it so much or find it so helpful, is that they appreciate the therapist's expertise. Like, you went to school for 8 years for this. I trust you know what you're doing. For the longest time, the witnesses called therapy specifically, I tell no lie, you can look in their archives, called therapy secular wisdom and would shame anybody who sought out therapy. They're having a backpedal on that now in, I'd say, the past 10 to 15 years. But for the longest time, it was like, oh, if you go to a therapist, What's wrong with you? You're just not praying enough. Something's wrong with you. You're spiritually weak. Secular wisdom from Satan. Yeah, because if you go to a therapist, they're going to be like, yeah, all that stuff you're learning at the Kingdom Hall. Yeah, there's a reason your brains are so scrambled and why you feel the way you feel. They don't want people going to therapy because then people might start to wake up. They heard this rhetoric their whole life in the organization, so that finally, when they go to a therapist, it's like, I actually value your insights. You can help me to understand that I'm not going crazy. My concerns are valid. My doubts are valid. This is just the indoctrination talking. They can help you, clear out the cobwebs. You actually went to school and studied this. Thank you. I know I'm not going crazy. Now for the opposition. Con number 1, therapy as a crutch. I mean, a common argument I've heard is that, they just feel like, pull yourself up. Life sucks. Shit happens. Move on. They have an approach to resilience that's just sort of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. Like, not everything needs to be, they feel as though therapy is a sort of coddling. Life sucks, pick yourself up. I didn't have a therapist or whatever, and look at me, I had to just move on. Whatever. Each of us has our own path, and that was the path they took, and that worked for them. Or maybe it didn't work for them, and that's none of our business. Kind of in the same vein, you'll get like, I don't need therapy, the mountains are my therapy. And I get that because I'm really connected to nature. I love the beach. I love hike. I love all that shit. So I definitely get it. And some people, that's what they stand on. It's just kind of like, I don't need to go shell out money to have some lady in a buttoned up blazer, sitting in her fancy leather chair, talking about my feelings. I don't need that. And quite frankly, to any XJW who is doing something positive with their life, whether that's physical, they have a hobby that they love, they're bringing positivity into their life and not letting what they went through completely consume them and keep them in a negative headspace. If they can find a way to do that without therapy, cool, great. So again, kind of in line with that, you'll get XJWs, who are like, okay, so the GB sucks. What else is new? Does a bear shit in the woods? Or they think that people who go to therapy are just whining about their childhood or just using it as a crutch. That's their perspective. Now, personally, I would say that if you are coming purely from the standpoint that if you seek therapy, you're weak, I don't agree with that either. Bottom line, I can understand why an XJW just doesn't feel like getting lost in the weeds with a therapist. They found a way to move on. Con number 2, a sense of mistrust. So another argument that I've heard from XJWs, and I can understand where they're coming from, is they just sort of feel like the whole thing is pretentious, which I would argue is not the same thing as being intimidated by somebody, because somebody can be smart, have all the qualifications, but at the end of the day, bottom line, they're super down to earth. Like, it just sounds like you're talking to another human being. At least some therapists, they just have this stench of elitism. They got 6 degrees hanging on their wall, and they earned it. They shouldn't have, I'm not saying they should apologize for being smart, but also, it doesn't matter if you have 1 million credentials after your name, if you're just completely unrelatable and treat people like they're stupid. And closely dovetailing that last comment, you have therapists who lose credibility in the eyes of potential patients who would otherwise seek their treatment or services, but they don't because, unfortunately, the therapist has highly politicized their mission statement and has shown themselves to be too biased. You heard of the oath, do no harm? Yeah, that goes out the window. And so instead of doing what's in the best interest of the patient, these particular therapists end up pushing their own ideology or agenda. Quick example, I'm not Christian, but if I need open heart surgery, all right, and that guy over there, he's the best damn surgeon, 100% success rate. I don't care if he thinks he's the next messiah, pass the scalpel. I don't agree with his politics or his worldview, so I'm going to die on the table to make a point. Okay. Me, I don't care who you worship, don't worship, who you who you voted for. I don't care. It's none of my business. What is my business is you're going to operate on my heart, and you better damn well know what you're doing. So just sort of in conversation with XJWs, I've heard this criticism, just do your job. These, superficial identity characteristics are not pertinent to the task at hand. And for some XJWs, that is precisely the thing that they're looking for in a therapist. And great, they'll find that therapist that's right for them. These individuals, they want a therapist who is compassionate, who's open-minded. But for some XJWs, they kind of sense the hive mind again in the profession, and it's sort of a turnoff. A dose of healthy skepticism is not a bad thing. Think about it, as an XJW, you don't want to go from the frying pan to the fire. Our minds were not our own when we were in the cult, when we were in the organization. So you don't want to just completely subjugate your conscience or hand over your mind, hand over your thinking faculties to somebody who's pushing their own thing on you. Again, not the case with all therapists, but the type does exist. Con number 3, the therapist just doesn't get it. Major reason that I've heard is that their therapist didn't get it. Their therapist was basically just completely oblivious to JW world. Not even they're not the number one people on the face of the earth. I am well aware of that. But the therapist didn't even have a basic, rudimentary, just working knowledge of who they were. Jehovah's Witnesses are everywhere. Where are you living under a rock? I went through 5 therapists. And when I say that, I don't mean that I spent a long time with each one. I just kind of went through each one to see who I was going to click with the most. And when I say, so I landed on the 5th therapist. She was the most effective. And what I mean by that is I'm not paying her to tell me whatever I want to hear and that I'm a shining star and validate everything. She was very warm, compassionate. She was an effective, qualified professional who had just a basic working knowledge of the witnesses. All right, she didn't have cult specialist, religious trauma specialist with 16 credentials on her business card. This is my opinion. Maybe a therapist will watch this and disagree. I don't think you have to be specializing in religious trauma or cult recovery or whatever to be an effective therapist, because a lot of the same strategies or tactics that they use at the Kingdom Hall or that they use in the organization are mimicked in abusive partner relationships or in some other setting. And as long as the therapist understands these factors and these strategies and tactics and how this works, even if they didn't come from the witnesses or they weren't born into a cult or whatever, they can still apply that same template. They can say, oh, that very much sounds like gaslighting or emotional manipulation or emotional blackmail. Okay. Oh, I can see why this is, oh, that's very abusive. This makes sense. Okay. When you describe it this way or you talk about this, that makes sense. Okay. This mimics an abusive relationship. So again, the therapist that I stayed with for a while, she understood all those things. And she had a basic working knowledge of the witnesses. And then, she would just kind of learn things along the way, piece things along the way, but she was still able to help me. She was able to give me constructive feedback, because I have met therapists who have those 16 credentials, but they're not necessarily the most adept. Sometimes the reason is that they didn't come from a cult themselves. They were not born into a high control group. They did not suffer through the consequences of what their patients are going through. So they lack that lived experience. But unfortunately, over the years, I've heard a lot of XJWs say that their therapist just didn't get it. They literally used that term or that phrasing. Their therapist was like, a deer in the headlights, kind of sat there with their clipboard, just and that happened to me with a few of the therapists that I went to. It was just kind of like, and when you're already tired, beat down, confused, coming out of the craziness, the cult craziness, you don't need a therapist. You don't need them kind of staring at you, piling on with their own ignorance, even if they don't have bad intentions. I'm not saying that they have, that they probably want to help you, but unfortunately at that point, when you've already shelled out your cash and you're talking to this person, if you're with somebody who's not the most qualified or the most effective, it can minimize the severity of what you've been through when you have to kind of apply salve to your own wounds. They're not meeting you where you're at. They're too far back. They have to play catch up just to help you. That's not the right therapist for you, because you got to explain all the ins and outs, and it's sort of re-traumatizing. I absolutely despise the fact that word has been hijacked by social media culture and that everybody and their dog uses the word trauma. For the sake of argument, you get what I mean. So yeah, bottom line, they just, the therapist didn't know anything about the witnesses, and so they didn't feel like the XJW didn't feel like they would derive any benefit from continuing to go to this person. So I get it. So yeah, there you go. Did you go to therapy? Are you putting it off? Do you care? What are your thoughts? You can leave a comment if you want. Be respectful to each other. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great week, and I will see you next time.